This is Sports Talk with Steve Jones, a Seven Mountains Media production, your daily talk show with the voice of Penn State football and men's basketball, featuring interviews with special guests. Now here's your host, Mr. Steve Jones. But Steve, I do want to start off. Normally, when someone gets something correct and I am wrong, I will own up to the error of my ways. And I will say it. You were right. Nuggets in 5. You nailed that. I was wrong. I bet against the wrong horse.
Even blind squirrels find acorns, my friend. It was a bittersweet night. So it was fun to see all the Penn State up on the stage last night. Lisa Salters doing the interview, former Lady Lion basketball player. Calvin Booth as the general manager of the Nuggets. I'll get to that in a moment. And the bitter part, the passing of Stan Savran. I had known for a little bit that Stan was in trouble physically. And I was even called yesterday, and they said, hey, look, it's probably just a matter of a couple hours. Stan Savran was somebody that was it's one. I'll say this, it's wonderful when someone leaves life and is so universally respected by everybody. And that's Stan, because he was just a great pro who was a great guy. So back in the day, Penn State used to do a television broadcast, a lot like the old Notre Dame highlights. And it was produced by Nelson Goldberg and TCS. And Stan, when Ray Scott moved on, the great legendary Ray Scott was the first one doing it. Ray Scott was tremendous. Great guy. But they brought on Stan, and he and George are doing the games together on the TV side. And Stan was an outstanding play-by-play announcer. Tremendous. Stan was good at everything. As a talk show host, brilliant. He and Guy Junker, another good friend, had the show on KBL for years. Stan, Guy, loved the show. Always. Every caller said that. Stan, Guy, loved the show. Nelson Goldberg came up with this idea. We're going to do a round table with Joe as the pregame show. I'm like, okay, so it's going to be Gil Santos, John Grant, myself, and the radio team with Stan Savran and George Paterno. And the show's going to go about 50 minutes with Joe. And then the last segment, we do our analysis and have some fun and do scores, things like that. We predict scores. I'm 25 years old. Right? And I had grown up in New England, so I knew exactly who Gil Santos was. I mean, he had been the voice of the Patriots for years, but there had been a gap where WBZ had lost the rights. So Gil, in that gap, was able to get the Penn State job. John Grant, of course, nothing but great things about John. And, of course, George, everybody knows George. And then there was Stan, who I didn't really know, but I knew of. And I thought to myself, and I had met him yet. I thought, oh, boy. How's this going to go? I mean, look, I haven't accomplished anything. I'm not in this guy's league. I mean, that's what I thought before I met him. He treated me like out of the gate, like a total equal. I'm thinking to myself, well, we are not. You're Stan Savran. I'm the third guy. I'm the fifth wheel here doing this thing. And that's not the way he treated me. he treated me so well all the time, where all of a sudden, like, boom, instant friendship, because Stan believed the whole thing was family. And I learned so much in the years working around him. You know, I learned from John Grant the value of preparation. I learned from Stan Savran how to interview and how to ask questions. The questions he would ask Joe in these roundtables. And I'd sit there and listen as to how he asked it, how he phrased it. It was never a statement. It was always a what or why question. And it was always asking questions, but not questioning him. Right? There's a difference. And I've told that to everybody that's been a coach here. I'm trying to think if I've told Mike Rhodes this yet, but I think at some point I will. I said, look, I'll ask you questions. I'll never question you. You know more than I do. Okay? And I learned so much listening to him and then just talking to him. And he was always asking me, he says, hey, Steve, what's your opinion on this? What's your opinion on that? Then I'd ask him, what's your opinion on this? It was just always had great conversations with him. I remember there was one year where, for whatever reason, they were late paying us. And when I mean late paying us, it's November. We haven't been paid yet. So Gil's had enough. He says, come on, everybody. He goes marching up to Nelson Goldberg in the hallway. Nelson, we don't get paid before the next game. We're not doing it. I'm standing there thinking, whoa, wait a minute. Let's not get too hasty here. Right. So the next week before the roundtable show, there's a check waiting for each of us. This is great. I quickly open up my check, kind of peek in. It's for the first game. I looked over at Gil, and Gil says, did you get one game, Steve? I said, yeah, I got one game. John says, yeah, I got one game too. Stan opened his. You know what his said? Void. Stan looks over. He says, and Stan was sitting right next to me. He says, Steve, check this out. He says, really? I said, yeah. I said, I'm sure they'll straighten it out here at some point. He says, oh, yeah, they'll straighten it out all right. But what a great announcer. Knew how to treat everybody. Everybody. Fan, athlete, coach, co-host, colleague, reporter. He knew how to treat everybody right. He was the embodiment of knowledge, skill, class. And Stan Savran, like I said, I was so fortunate. I was able to sit in this living, breathing broadcasting classroom for 4 years. I mean, 4 years. I had a guy like John Grant who was big on preparation, which I've carried on, at least I think I have. I had a guy like Stan Savran, who was an outstanding play-by-play in his own right, but he was doing TV play-by-play. So, so slightly different than radio. But watching him work, ask questions, how he analyzed, how he did it, where everything was out without malice, but was knowledgeable, asked the right questions, asked questions, not statements. And then Gil Santos, who was a play-by-play guy, where you'll hear me to this day use certain phrases when I broadcast a game that come directly from that playbook. And the way I'll ask questions today come directly from Stan's playbook. Right? And those guys meant so much to me as to where I am now And I'm not sure. I mean, and I've talked to Stan a bunch over the years, so it's not like, it's one of those never lost touch. We've talked a lot over the years. I'm not really sure I conveyed to him that. I remember I conveyed it to Gil once, and Gil said to me, he said, I had no idea how much I meant. I said, just sitting there. These are the kind of great pros I was exposed to that to this minute still influence me, and Stan Savran absolutely is one of them. And he and Guy Junker is one of the greatest guys on the planet. The Guy did all that. God, what a fabulous writer Guy happens to be. But, yeah. So it's bittersweet. As for Calvin Booth, when he came here, he was recruited by Bruce Parkhill. And actually, Ed DeChellis was the lead recruiter. Calvin was not a talker in any way, shape, or form. Calvin's dad passed away in 2020. Was great guy. I mean, Calvin's dad was a great guy. When it came time to commit, I think Bruce, they went down the corner room or something like that. And Calvin's dad finally says, Calvin, you got something to tell him? Calvin looked over and goes, no. He goes, don't you have something to tell him? He says, I don't think so. He says, what we talked about this morning? He says, oh, yeah, I'm going to come to Penn State. That's the way Calvin was. Now, Calvin redshirted the 1 year with Bruce, which would have been the, 94-95 season, Bruce's last season as the head coach. And he redshirted. And I remember watching him work out, and when they were practicing in rec hall, I'm like, oh, he's going to be a good player. Defensively, he's going to be a good player. Offensively, you could see he was working on it. And then he became a 4-year starter and set all these records for block shots and became a really good offensive player in the process. And as time went, talked more and more and more. But at the senior banquet, when they got to his highlight tape, it was a series of plays with me saying, block by Booth, block by Booth, block by Booth. Right? The point, it almost got, so many of them, it was comical. After he got drafted by the Wizards, and he was like the 35th overall pick, which is actually higher than Jokic.
41.
Calvin played in the league for 10 years. Yeah, he moved all over the place, but he kept his career alive for 10 years. But then he got into scouting when he's done. He had a pathway. He got into scouting when he was done, and then eventually worked his way through the front office with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And I remember we were out one night. Penn State was going to play Minnesota in basketball, and he called up. He says, hey, you guys want to come over to the game? So got us a box over at the Target Center. And he came over and sat with us for a while. When Tim Conley left, now he went over to the Nuggets. When Tim Conley left to take, ironically, the Timberwolves job, Calvin was elevated. And I think it was Josh Kroenke really is the one that runs the day-to-day with the Nuggets, not his father, Stan.
Yeah,
Yes.
Josh is the one who runs the day-to-day for both the Nuggets and for Arsenal FC. He kind of does both.
Yeah. And so they elevated him. And the running joke between the two of us over the last 3 or 4 years has been, I would say, hey, Cal, how's the job going? And he'd say, the answer's the same every time. He says, Steve, I have 1.5. I'm good. 1.5 for the uninitiated is Nikola Jokic. And Nikola Jokic is obviously a special player, which we'll get to in a moment. But the Nuggets had to make some serious decisions here. They were really good, and I remember talking to Cal when he was in the bubble, I talked to him. He was down in Orlando, and I was talking to him. And they had overcome, I want to say Utah in the opening round. They were down 3-1. They came back and won. And they got all the way to the Western Conference Final. And they were 2 wins away and couldn't get it done. The Lakers eventually won the title.
Well, real quick, they went 3-1 in 2 different series, I believe, in the bubble.
Did they?
It was 3-1 against the Jazz.
Yeah.
It was then, if I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to remember who
Clippers.
it was. Maybe it was the Clippers 3-1. The Clippers were up 3-1, and they blew it away. And then they went up against the Lakers. So 2 straight 3-1s is crazy.
And I remember talking to Calvin when they were in the bubble. I may have talked to him for maybe 20 minutes, a half hour, or whatever. And I said, where do you think you are right now? And he said, he says, we're really close. He said, we're going to have to make some decisions. I said, okay. And what they did was, to their credit, instead of making the big splashy move, because they could have made a trade for Kyrie Irving if they wanted to. But what does that do to change what you have? If you're close and you're patient, you can make it happen. If you're close and you panic, you can derail it. They looked at Jokic and Murray, and they were smart enough to know that when Murray went down, and I talked to him before the preseason. I would talk to him in the preseason. And I said to him, I said, I love your team because you've got Murray back. And he looked at me. He said, "Wow." I said, "I got to give you credit. You know our team pretty well." I said, I think Calvin. I think he's a special player. Not having him they won 48 games without him. I said, with him, I said, you're going to be really good. But they had to make some moves. So the moves he made in the bubble, he saw Caldwell Pope play for the Lakers. Loved the tenacity and everything that went with him. Not a star, not expected to be a star, but was a star in his role.
And do you know what his nickname is? Keep Championship Players, KCP.
Right. He drafted Christian Brown, first round. Now, Christian Brown, if you know his background, 3 consecutive high school championships in Kansas, and then the national championship for Kansas against North Carolina, in which he played all 40 minutes.
Not half bad.
Calvin is a big believer, as is Mike Malone, in having multiple options everyone talks about, you have you have to have multiple wings and this, that. Okay. It's not multiple wings. They want to have multiple wing defenders. Okay? Multiple wing defenders. Well, Christian Brown fit that. And then the free agent acquisition of Bruce Brown, which, again, Calvin was really surprised on the second day of free agency. You go through the first day. There's that first layer that everybody, oh, my God, the big splashy ones, right? He said, second day, I was really surprised. He was still there. He said, and Michael Malone wanted him too. He said, that's the kind of guy we need. Another guy. He was really played out of position with the Nets. The Pistons were going nowhere. They're the ones that drafted him out of Miami. And they said, this guy fits, and he's going to play more of a guard in our system, which is what he is. That's where playing him at a wing and just playing him out of. Right. He said, and Calvin felt that, he said, I was surprised he was there on the second day. He said, but we looked at him as a second-day possibility financially, but we thought he might go the first day financially. He said, and it turned out he didn't go the first day financially, which then fit what we wanted to do financially with him as a second day. They got him.
Home run.
Right. But again, the fit. And this is how they put it together. This is, Michael Malone, great feel. He was a big supporter of Calvin getting the job. And Calvin has made it pay off. And this is where Calvin's years of being a scout, where he paid his dues, worked his way up through organizations, player personnel director, assistant general manager. I mean, he worked his way through. And it all started by being a scout. His ability to look at talent to see where it fits. I mean, I can the Big Ten tournaments, the number of times I've run into Calvin at Big Ten tournaments where he was there to look at players when he was a scout. And obviously when he was playing, I hardly ever ran into him when he was playing. After he stopped playing, I ran into him or talked to him a lot more. And he just has that great eye for it. He understands what fits, what doesn't fit. Now, not every move's going to be perfect. But he made all the right moves. And the biggest move of all that started with Tim Conley, because Conley is the one that drafted Jokic. He's the one that drafted Murray. He's the one that drafted Porter. All right. And I think he's the one that made the trade for Gordon. Right. All the other parts. Right. But they got to a certain point. It was the other moves that Calvin made that took those parts and pushed the top. They were patient. When maybe the world was telling them you had to add in the third, in other words, the third guy. I got to get that third star in there, Kyrie Irving. And they didn't do it. Yeah. So now they're sitting there as champions. And I'm so happy for him. And I'm happy he's getting the recognition he deserves.
He deserves it fully.
I mean, Michael Malone, too. I mean, who's a heck of a coach. 8 years as the coach of the Nuggets. I mean, he's...
And that's where I'm kind of stuck, is thinking about how since I think 2016-17, after that season, people every year would be like, this was the year Malone's going to get canned. Right. It's going to be the year. And I think the odds were greater than zero that if they didn't win, he might not be back. Right. He may not have been there this year.
Well,
but he's back. And
he understands how to coach, what he wants. And Calvin has done a great job of saying this. They put in guys around that fit. In other words, I already have my 2 stars. I don't need a third star. I just need to have solid contributors around them. And it really paid off in Game 4.
Big time.
Because Game 4 is the one where Jokic was in foul trouble, and they won. Getting Murray back, because Murray had missed the last 2 playoffs. Murray had not played in the playoffs since the bubble because of the ACL. Getting him back for the full year, you see, he's just a terrific player. It is a league that features a lot of very flashy, fun guards. John Morant, whatever you think about this off the court stuff, but on the court, John Morant, Trae Young, okay, John Wall,
Russell Westbrook.
What do those 4 have in common?
Athletic, fast, flashy, do these highlight moves that you're like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And they're all 6 foot.
And they all have combined for no championships. Now you get a guy like Jokic. Not flashy in any way, shape, or form. But what does he do besides scoring his 20 points?
Makes the right play.
He makes everybody around him better. He puts them in the right spot to succeed because he's such a great passer. What don't the 4 previous guys do?
Make everyone else better.
Make everybody else better. They're great. Right? They're great. When they got the ball in their hands, they are terrific. But they don't often enough make people around them better. Steph Curry is a flashy guard in a lot of ways, but as time has gone, he's made people around him better. right? Now, I want him shooting more often than not anyway. I mean, you can question whether Jason Tatum makes people around him better. You can question it whether Embiid does. But Jokic makes everybody around him better. Okay? Dirk Nowitzki made everybody around him better.
LeBron James makes everyone around him better.
Everybody else around him better. So did Jordan, right? They made, Bird, Magic. I mean, the guys that we think of over time as the greats of the greats made everybody else around them better. They didn't care about that. They didn't care about their game. I mean, you can go all the way back. I mean, obviously, you would never have been alive when Bill Russell played. Bill Russell didn't care how many points he scored. He wasn't the leading scorer on the Celtics. But boy, you need a block shot. You need a rebound. You need a guy to make a pass. You need a guy to make a play. He could. Oh, by the way, I feel like scoring tonight. Okay, fine. But he wasn't that guy. Jokic is like that. He makes people, and Murray, to his credit, look how many double-digit assist game Murray made. And Murray and Jokic, you can tell, are like this. You can tell the respect each has for the other. They're great teammates together. And you listen to Jokic get interviewed afterward. He's like, it's my team this, my team that. What did Jokic do when the game was over? It's the first thing he did.
Went and shook every Miami Heat player's hand.
He hugged every one of them. Then he went and joined his team. And then he was talking, somebody asked him about the parade. He goes, well, I want to go home.
He wanted to go see his horses as well. Yeah. I think it's part of what he said in that.
I want to go home. And he never talks about himself. Now, Murray talks about himself, but every time Murray talks about himself, it's in the context of, look, his rehab is hard. And so he talks about what his dad meant to him and so forth. So that's different because that's a personal story. But when it comes to the basketball part, Murray doesn't talk about himself either. He just doesn't. He talks about Jokic. And everybody has to talk about Jokic for him. And this was... I felt when the season began, I thought Denver had a chance to win it because they got Murray back. And obviously, you and I just started working together a short period of time ago. But how many times have you heard me mention Murray's name?
Quite often.
Right. Which, when I was doing the show before you got here, I mentioned in the preseason, early in the season, watch out for Denver with Murray back to go with Jokic. They're a factor. But, because you can just see that they had something. But Calvin did a great job of building around them.
Well, that year that Murray got hurt, I believe, was when they got Aaron Gordon in the trade. They had 10 games, and they were like 9-1, and they looked like they could beat anyone and put up 190 points and do everything they needed to. And then Murray got hurt. And that year, they probably would have gone on and maybe won a championship.
And here's the key. I talked about multiple wing defenders. Boy, interchangeable parts. Everybody thinks about interchangeable parts. They always think about the offense. Okay? Calvin's a big believer, as is Michael Malone, in getting multiple wing defenders out there. How many points did the Heat score last night? 89. In a 48-minute NBA game where you can't hand check anymore if you do that. Although it was a little
the fourth quarter was the refs
game,
were
the whole game was like the first quarter was like that. The guys got shoved all over the place. I'm thinking, what am I watching here?
The fact that the refs didn't blow their whistle every time, I quite enjoyed up until that Jimmy Butler 3 that he was which shouldn't have been called.
That was a bad
but
call.
Outside of that, they just held their whistle, and I was like, okay. They're just not going to call it on anyone, and that's okay with us. We liked
the
physicality.
Call on Butler was confusing.
Yeah, that one shouldn't have counted, but take that one out. The rest they let it go. They let things go.
This is what I'm wondering about that call. What I'm wondering about that call is I don't think they had a replay as to who got the ball when the shot was missed.
No.
And I think that may have been the reason why.
Just a little bit. Imagine if that had led to the Heat winning tonight, and then say they go home game 6 and win. All of a sudden, that one play is being discussed intensely.
Right.
But now it's not going to. It's going to be forgotten because it didn't end up mattering at the end of the day, which I quite enjoy. As someone whose teams have been very poorly managed game-wise, like with referees, New Orleans Saints, I enjoy when there is not an issue with the refs that leads to a game-altering decision.
Of course.
Yeah.
Now, here's a little quick history lesson. All right. When the ABA formed, where were the Denver Nuggets supposed to play?
Oh. Is it east or west of the Mississippi? Give me that.
It is just west of the Mississippi.
West of the Mississippi. Gonna go with St. Louis.
Kansas City.
Kansas City.
There was an investor in Kansas City, and there were two reasons. Funds were coming up short, and they couldn't find a suitable place to play at that time. They had the old municipal, they don't have the I don't know, what's it called?
Ball Arena.
No, well, the Sprint Center, what's it called in Kansas City now?
Oh,
T-Mobile.
yeah,
I think
T-Mobile.
It's called T-Mobile, because Penn State would have gone there had they beaten Texas, right, was to that arena. They didn't have that back then. They had the old municipal auditorium where Penn State played in the 1954 Final Four, okay? And so they didn't think it was a suitable enough arena. And a guy from Denver stepped in and said, "Look, I've got the money to handle this." And that's when the arena issue came up. And he said, "Okay, let's just go to Denver." Right? And he isn't quite financially stable. So he sells half the team. They haven't played a game yet. He sells half the team to a trucking company. And the original nickname was supposed to be the Denver Larks.
What a name.
Because of Lark Trucking. They finally said, no, let's just go with the Denver Rockets. So they were supposed to be in Kansas City. Problems, typical 60s ownership problem that you get with an expansion, new league, the whole thing. Go to Denver. It's like the Raiders. The Raiders are supposed to be in Minnesota. The Raiders franchise was awarded in Minnesota. And they said, okay, and the NFL stepped in and go, we're going to put a team here. Okay, we're going to go to Oakland. Right. Well, this is what happened with them. So they become the Denver Rockets. Then they eventually changed their name about 2 years before they go to the NBA to the Denver Nuggets. And then, they've got David Thompson, they've got Dan Issel. What people don't know is that the Nuggets and the Nets had both applied for NBA status and it went to court and it got rejected.
Oh.
Right? And then the merger happened a year later, and then they came in. The Nuggets were really good the first 3 years after the merger, but couldn't get out of their own way in the playoffs. But, yeah, here they are today. It's their first title. They got the one ABA championship series, and it was against Julius Erving, Larry Keenan, Billy Paltz, Bill Melchione, and the Nets. I don't remember much about it. But the Nets won the series. And then Dr. J was then traded. After they merged, Dr. J is traded to the Sixers. The Nets then spiraled down for a long period of time.
Yeah.
The Nuggets are good for like 3 years, can't get out of their own way. Then David Thompson runs into a couple of off-the-court problems, unfortunately. And, yeah. And they finally get to the promised land.
They get to the promised land, and they get through it with a 41st overall draft pick in Nikola Jokic, which I'm going to ask you a question, and it's a bit rhetorical, or I at least know your answer, what it's going to be. To all the people who are like, oh my gosh, how did Jokic fall to 41? You shouldn't have let him fall there. All these teams missed on Jokic. I think I know we were discussing stupid arguments yesterday. That is the most ridiculous statement ever. I believe Popovich has discussed Manu Ginobili before, where he said, if we were smarter, we would have taken Manu in the first round.
Right.
But nobody can't know that a second rounder, in this case, Nikola Jokic, is going to be an MVP. No one knows that.
this is a case of a foreign player not playing college basketball. He's out of Serbia. Manu was playing in what, Brazil?
Manu was, I believe, Brazil or Argentina or somewhere.
Right. And you don't have a feel in some ways for the competition they're playing against. And let's face it, you look at Jokic, and let's go back to when he was drafted. Well, he's not the fastest guy out there. He's not the sleekest guy out there. All right. But what he knows how to do is he knows how to play basketball. There's not another sport he can play. He can play other sports, but he wouldn't be great at it. There are certain individuals that are great athletes playing a sport, right? And I always use this example. Danny Ainge, who's now the general manager of the Utah Jazz, was a great athlete playing basketball. He was the starting third baseman for the Toronto Blue Jays and a starting guard for the Boston Celtics. A great athlete playing basketball. Larry Bird was a basketball player. Some people are just made for their particular sport. And Nikola Jokic is a basketball player. Nikola Jokic is a basketball player. His feel on the court, knowing where all the chess pieces are, his attitude as to how he approaches it, helped in part by the attitude and the skills of a Jamal Murray. That's what separates him. And you can't really tell that because he wasn't playing against Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, Kentucky. And I think sometimes a foreign-born player, especially back when he was drafted, I don't know, he was drafted 6-7 years ago?
He was drafted 2014.
2014, so he was drafted 9 years ago.
41st overall. Right. Do you know who else, by the way, was drafted ahead of him technically by Denver, who plays the same position, who they ended up trading away in 2016-17 to make way so Jokic would be the starting center? Yusuf Nurkic. Okay. That was part of the 16-17 season. They said, okay, we're going to trust Jokic. They gave him the reins, traded away Nurkic. Nurkic then at the end of that season beat them with the Trailblazers to knock the Nuggets out. Right. So but it was a season.
Right. But you sit there and you look at him, right? Passing, exemplary, feel for the game, knowing where the other 9 chess pieces are. But then you watch him shoot. He can shoot threes. Okay? Today's game. Doesn't shoot a bunch of them, but he can shoot threes. And his touch around the basket is just stunning for a big man. His touch around the basket, the little floater, the little release, the little move he does. It's, again, the guy knows how to play the game. And, to be honest with you, they're a fun team to watch. The problem is you don't get to watch them that often. I mean, they don't get a lot of publicity. They are not the Lakers. They are not the Celtics.
And it didn't help them, at least this year, that post-All-Star break, they were, I believe, 12-11. Yeah. And before that looked like world beaters. They were the first overall seed at that point. Everyone kind of knew that. Right. And going into the playoffs, because they had gone 12-11 in the back half of the season.
But nobody had watched them play.
No one watched them play. And then it was like, oh, you see they lose. Oh, they're not as good as people say they are. They're going to get knocked out. But logically, this was going to be the outcome anyway.
I mean, would I watch Denver once in a while? Sure, because Calvin Booth's the general manager. Right.
And they'll be in Boston playing the Celtics.
Right. Well, no, but I mean, in other words, would I watch them on TV once in a while? Because Calvin Booth's the general manager. And so, I'd pick up a game here or there just to see them play. I always liked how they played the game. But they aren't the Golden State Warriors. They aren't the Lakers. They aren't the Celtics. They don't have Joel Embiid. And they aren't the Nets with Durant and Irving. They're the Denver Nuggets. The only Mountain Time Zone team. Well, I guess maybe Utah's in the Mountain Time Zone.
Yeah.
Right? But they're in the Mountain Time Zone. Like, okay, great. Okay. And nobody watched them. I don't think anybody watched them until they played the Lakers.
Yeah. Doesn't happen often. I have a question for you. So that draft, The 2014 draft. Of course, it was the Wiggins draft where he went first overall to Cleveland, but then to Minnesota and that thing.
Yeah, the Kevin Love trade.
There are a couple players I want to see who went ahead of Jokic, who I want to see if you know where they went to school. Sure. I'm not going to go with the Europeans because that'll be a bit much. I don't know if you know where Bruno Caboclo went, but we'll skip over him. Do you know where Josh Huestis went to school? He was drafted 29th overall by the Thunder.
No.
He went to Stanford. And then move up one spot, C.J. Wilcox to the Clippers, 28th overall.
Was Wilcox out of Cal?
He was out of Washington.
Washington.
And then the last one, my favorite one of all in this chunk, you'll know this one, Nick Stauskas, 8th overall Michigan. To the Sacramento Kings.
Michigan. Yeah, Michigan. He's out of Canada.
Yeah. So all those
Outstanding
guys.
Shooter. He played against Penn State. Really good shooter.
So all those guys, first round picks, all ahead of Jokic. But the thing is, no one knows at the end of the day where these prospects will be. Because the second round of that year alone, you've got Joe Harris, Spencer Dinwiddie, Jeremy Grant, Jokic, and Jordan Clarkson.
Yeah, but what
all great players.
But what do all five of those guys have in common? They all know how to play the game. You watch Joe Harris play the game. I mean, Harris was out of Virginia, I believe, right? He knows how to play. They aren't one-trick ponies.
Yeah.
Clarkson's not a one-trick pony out there. He can do one thing. All five of those guys are a little more experienced. And let's face it, you're a guy like Jokic, and you're playing in Europe. Who are you playing against? You're playing against men. Hey, they are not playing against like AAU 16 and 17-year-olds. They're playing against men. Right? You don't think there are a few times he got thrown around a little bit by a couple of people? It's like,
and these guys were all drafted behind Dante Exum. They were drafted behind
Dante Exum out of Australia, who was drafted by the Jazz.
5th overall.
I had a big issue with that year. Like going in, I said, no offense. I said, but I don't get it.
No one got it.
I said, I don't understand why he's considered a top 5 pick. I mean, this is before the draft. Then they get drafted, and they said, well, that's their problem now. They get drafted by Utah?
Utah 5th overall. And that draft, like, I'm just looking at these names, and some of them I'm just like, this is a throwback. You've got Exum, 5th overall. Nick Stauskas, who we already said, 8th overall. You've got, who else? Adrian Payne out of Michigan State. James Young out of Kentucky.
Adrian Payne, who got into an incident at the Nittany Lion Inn.
Like all these guys. PJ Harrison out of UNC. These guys that they didn't have as great a career as guys drafted below them. But again, you can't tell how good someone's going to be.
Well, Jokic, you can't. The other guys, you can. I didn't think Payne was going to do well in the NBA.
But even so, I mean if you're...
And remember, I watched a lot of Adrian Payne against Penn State. I watched a lot of him. He had a couple really good games, and he had a couple mediocre games. But I'm sitting there thinking, I don't think he's an NBA guy. I didn't sit there and say, whoa, he's going to be a first-round pick in the NBA. Then he's a first-round pick. I'm like, oh, really?
Cleveland used a second-round pick on Joe Harris. He didn't look like a big NBA guy at that point, and now he's one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA.
But see, I thought he would be an NBA guy. I'm watching him in Virginia because he can do more than just shoot threes. But he's a really good shooter. I mean, that was Stauskas' MO. He was supposed to be the shooter coming in. It was like, and it hasn't really translated.
Yeah. The realistic point of this is that you can't always know how good someone's going to be. It's the draft at the end of the day is a lottery, and you are hoping your lottery pick pans out and you win. And in the case of Denver, they won at 41. But in the case of Utah at 35 and with Jarnell Stokes out of Tennessee, they lost.
But they also won with Murray at 7. Okay. So and what's interesting is there is no question the NHL obviously is the most international of games. I mean, anybody who argues that doesn't understand how many guys are from Canada.
I have a quiz question for you.
But Murray's from Canada, and Jokic is from Serbia, and they're the two biggest. I mean, the NBA is of the other 3 sports the most international of all.
I have a quiz question for you. So, Jokic taken second round in 2014. 2015, Denver had a 7th overall pick, and then 2016 they had again the 7th overall pick, where they took Murray in 2016.
Right.
Who was their 2015 7th overall draft pick? Not often do you see a team select back-to-back the same location. I'm wondering if you'd like me to give you the rundown of the players around him. I can do that.
No, I won't be able to get it.
Okay. This draft, by the way, the Karl Anthony Towns won. Number 7. One of the most interesting players I think ever. Emmanuel Mudiay was drafted 7th overall that year.
Mudiay was a guy was not big on. Was not big on Mudiay.
That draft, by the way, was Karl Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, Jahlil Okafor.
Well, Russell played against Penn State when he was at Ohio State. You could see he had an NBA game.
Yeah. Then Jahlil Okafor, part of the process. Kristaps Porzingis,
Okafor.
4th overall.
Okay. Okafor can't play defense.
Nope, never could.
Right. That's why they picked him. I was like, what?
And they had just drafted Embiid the year prior.
Yeah. Now, Embiid, they knew was going to be out for 2 years.
And then you've got Porzingis, Mario Hezonja, Willie Cauley-Stein, Mudiay, Stanley Johnson, Frank Kaminsky, and Justice Winslow to round out the top 10.
Frank the Tank. The first 2 years, Kaminsky's at Wisconsin. And Kaminsky played 4 years at Wisconsin. First 2 years. Dick and I are, okay, just another guy. Okay. You don't sit there in the off season saying, "Oh boy, I wonder how much improvement because Frank the Tank's going to make here." And then he gets to be a junior, and the two of us are looking at each other like, "Where did this come from?" Now everybody develops at their own speed, and Bruce Parkhill taught me that a long time ago. Penn State had a player, Bruce Blake. Came in with Brian Allen, Tom Hovass, Eddie Fogel. Fogel had to redshirt his first year with a back issue. This is before Calvin was here, years before. So one day we're practicing in freshman year, and I'm just chit-chatting with Bruce, and I said, what about this guy, that guy? And he said, let me ask you about Blake. I said, what do you think he is right now? He says, Steve, he's still trying to work his way through. He said, well, get him in the weight room, get a little bit more on him. I said, he just needs more confidence. When he gets to be a junior, he's going to be a terrific player. Right? This is a freshman. So he goes through the rest of his freshman year. Okay. Gets minimal minutes as a sophomore year. As a junior, boom. Well, this was Frank the Tank. Right? First 2 years, and again, we only see him when, playing games or obviously against Penn State. But they got to the third year, like, holy mackerel. And then the fourth year, I have a Wooden Award vote. I voted for Frank Kaminsky. Like, okay. Even though I'll say this, you knew as an NBA type of player, Decker was better.
And Sam Decker, 18th overall that year to the Houston Rockets.
Decker
was a 6'8", 6'9" kind of wing.
Decker was the 5-star. And he drove Bo Ryan nuts because he's so talented. Like, yeah. Bo was very structured. Very structured. And Decker was not structured. But they got to the national championship game because they finally just let Decker and those guys play. And
they beat the Kentucky team, the undefeated Kentucky team that year with Cat, and then the sixth man for them was Devin Booker.
Right. And the Harrison
twins, Aaron and I
just call them the Harrison twins. But Wisconsin,
what a team that year.
No, really good. Yeah. Right? Because you want to know why? Instead of trying to win games like basketball and wood, like football and wood, they would play football and wood.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Which goes back to the days of Dick Bennett. And that's what we always refer to it as. Great, football and wood, here it comes. And they'd be winning games 50-49. Then they brought Soderholm in, and then they brought Bo in. They kept playing the same way. Same way, all the time. Didn't matter what guys. They had good players, but they kept playing the same way. It's like having water drip on your forehead. You know, the shot clock is down to 5. Okay, and we'll take a shot. It's okay, great. Until he got to that team. Those two teams, the two teams that went to the Final Four back-to-back, I think they went back-to-back.
Right? I believe so.
Right? Guess what he did? He let the horses out of the barn. He says, go ahead, run.
Yeah.
Play. Shot clock? Yeah, don't worry about that. We're not worried about any stinking shot clock.
Yeah, that was the Kaminsky, Decker, Nigel Hayes, Zach Showalter. Yeah, what a crew.
Nigel Hayes, forward, really good player, smooth, could step out, hit a 3, could rebound, good face-up player, really good defender. And for years, he was the one that put his name on the lawsuit that ended up being Alston, right? Because he felt that the players should be paid. Right? Well, he was the one that put his name on it for a period of time. It ended up being Alston, from West Virginia. So Hayes has a legacy.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Got to run. Thanks for being with us here on Seven Mountains Media.
And, of course, thanks for tuning in to Sports Talk with Steve Jones, a Seven Mountains Media production. Check back daily for all the latest sports news and analysis with the voice of Penn State football and